Meeting's ordered. We have the roll call of the city council. I'm sure we have a quorum. I think we did.
Mayor Johnston.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney.
Here.
Councilmember Blatz.
Here.
Councilmember Francina.
Here.
Councilmember Wyrick.
Here.
Chair Merck.
Here.
Vice Chair Quillisi.
Here.
Commissioner Corbin. Commissioner Jagiello. Commissioner Powers. Did I miss anyone?
Commissioner Nolan?
Commissioner Nolan.
Don't mark me
Okay,
absent.
well, we have a quorum of the council, and we're not gonna be making any decisions, and so if we have the quorum of the planning and commission, that's good. If not, we're just here to share concerns. Is that what the agenda said?
It's like a workshop, as
Remember to turn
Mr. Haney
myself
said.
So,
Discuss items of interest to the
I always
commission.
forget.
Do we want to do the Pledge of Allegiance and all that sort of?
yeah, I guess we should. We'll do it twice, but.
Are we doing the pledge, please?
Yes, John, will you lead us?
I will.
Okay.
Read after me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we do have one public comment card. Why don't we start with that? And it's Dina?
What's for the present,
Good evening. We're all here this evening after all those crazy rains. Dear City Council members and Planning Commission members, we're all aware of the challenges our community faces in regard to affordable housing, especially in the wake of the recent natural catastrophes. This need has become all the more pressing as more and more people become displaced in our communities. I am here to invite City Council and Planning Commission members to collaborate with Habitat for Humanity in submitting a proposal for a $500,000 research and development grant offered by Fannie Mae's Sustainable Communities Innovation Challenge. This grant, part of a 2-year, $10 million investment by Fannie Mae, is being offered to qualifying communities for the purpose of creating affordable housing solutions while generating new economic and employment opportunities. The grant would allow Ojai and surrounding areas of the opportunity to build affordable, energy-efficient, sustainable, and fire-resistant housing. This prototype, if easily replicable and easily built, can serve as a template for other cities to follow. The funding would enhance labor opportunities for those who currently live and work in the Ojai community. It would further allow Ojai to generate a prototype and business model, which in collaboration with Habitat for Humanity can be implemented on a national scale. Grants will be awarded to applicants with the most innovative ideas, and I believe this is tightly rooted to providing change in legislation for alternative housing options. I believe Ojai is perfectly suited to meet the criteria of this grant, both in terms of our needs and with the outstanding talents and resources the community can bring to this effort. The first deadline for the grant application is February 23rd. Alignment with local regulatory authorities and Habitat for Humanity to provide access to affordable housing while also creating employment opportunities will be critically important for the success of the proposal. As the next step, a meeting with Habitat for Humanity and potentially with representatives from Steve Bennett's office has been planned to discuss the details of the grant proposal. We would like to request members of the City Council and Planning Commission to attend the meeting this Thursday, January 11th. This is an unprecedented opportunity to enhance the lives and livelihoods of all who live in Ojai and surrounding communities. We ask that city officials support this effort, bringing with you the full force of Ojai's dedication to the well-being of its people, its land, and the visitors who love this town as much as we do. And I have a copy of the grant proposal.
Does that include where and when for that meeting?
The when is Thursday at,
We're proposing 12 to 1:30 p.m.
and I still have to ask if we can have it here.
Okay.
And if not here, there's other options,
Yeah.
like the Ojai Valley Green Coalition's office or
So this date's not set?
No, the
It is
date is
set.
Thursday. Dina has met with numerous officials already. She's done so much homework.
Just want to know where and when.
I had a sense you said it was gonna be at Bennett's office.
No,
It's not
no.
gonna be at Bennett. Is
Here.
Bennett, is he coming?
Representative from Bennett's office.
The CEO office, Tracy Montale,
Gonna come here.
and Cindy Cantle has been told about it already.
Okay.
Steve, the hench person.
Check
the calendar
Okay.
to see.
So these are the details for the grant.
There may be more coming, yeah.
Thank you.
Is this yours? Does anyone not have
Got
one?
anyone else need
One
one?
more. Does anyone missing? Anyone have one?
So Steve Dwyer from Habitat for Humanity, the executive director, is willing to come here from his Oxnard office to meet with whoever's available. So, thank you.
Gail, I hate to lean on you, but if we get this nailed down, it'd be great to send it out, a little notice to everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
At 11:30 on Thursday.
No.
Okay,
Can I ask, is that open to the public, that meeting?
Should,
Rita, is it open to the
Think so.
public? Can they,
We're trying to limit the number of participants, but Gail, if you'd like to come, that would be,
she's on the board, should be good.
yeah, that would be, that would be beneficial.
okay, we're on the air, or at least I'm now on the air, having been silent up until now. What is on the mind of the commission if that is what we're having a joint meeting over?
you know, we didn't come up with any formal topics for this meeting. We did have some discussion over the last few months about whether we should do away with our sustainability subcommittee. It doesn't seem to be that there's a lot that needs to be done in that. I mean, there is a lot of that we need to do in terms of sustainability, but some of the commissioners are feeling like it's kind of spreading our resources a little more thinly than we'd like. And I think the general topic of subcommittees is something that would be good to discuss. And Kathy, can you maybe fill in a little bit on that in terms of
Sure.
what's being done at the moment?
Just a little background on the Sustainability Committee. One of our past commissioners had actually come to City Council and, asked if he could form a Sustainability Committee, and I believe he was supposed to have some sort of report within the first year, and I'm going back, and I think that was 2015. He ended up moving. I was on the committee, also Commissioner Jaggiello. And I will admit that it's kind of been a rocky road. In other words, people weren't involved, But I personally would like to see the committee continue, and I think it has something to offer. But I'm going to say this, I think at the moment I am the committee. Commissioner Jaggiello has resigned from it, and I know Commissioner Powers has, of course, lost his home and what have you. He hasn't been to the last commission meeting, so. And there may be other commissioners that want to get on board, but I would say even if they aren't, and there was approval from the Planning Commission, of course, and direction from City Council, I personally be willing to continue on with it because we identified that the key issues we wanted to address were water and fire, which to me makes a lot of sense, something that we want to look at. And I know I did come to City Council, well, at least it was, I don't know, sometime in the last month, and kind of brought this up. So the things that I'm just going to share what I was looking at, and then we'll see if we want to go anywhere from there. But as far as the water, I'm happy to continue on with water in the landscape. I actually chaired the committee for the Modified Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance and the landscape standards. There's a little more we could do with that. There's some things that I feel are missing from the landscape standards. For instance, I had mentioned this before, like a fuel modification plan, which is required by the county. I've also done it for LA County and Malibu. And basically, once we identify our new fire maps, because I realize the present fire map has a high fire zone, and then it has the rest of Ojai,
No fires.
a no-fire zone. And it needs, in my opinion, and I believe some other people have looked at it, that it needs to be modified. And based on what we heard from CAL FIRE, once we get their kind of base map, the city has the ability, if so desired, to go in and further define it. They can make it more restrictive, in other words, but we do have to keep the base information or base locales. So by looking at that, and this, how do I tie the Sustainability Committee into it? This is my suggestion, recommendation, that per each fire zone, because I think we need to have more than just a very high. I think we need to have a high and probably a moderate zone. And we'd also look at the outlying areas outside of the city limits, adjacent to. Identify what could be done in the landscape as far as fuel modification. And that may include plant lists of things that could be planted there or not. I don't think it needs to be overcomplicated. It may sound complicated as I'm describing it, but I don't see ultimately that it would have to be. So if somebody comes in, they're going to pull permits for a project. One of the things that they would have to check off is, oh, you have to look at the fire map. Where's my address? Where's my property located? And once they located, there would be a guide. Okay, this is what I need to do to that property. In other words, to get my permit, I need to do a fuel modification plan, or maybe it's a maintenance program, what have you. So that's something I would like to put out there. I also think some recommendations on maintenance, which ties into enforcement. We could make the suggestion, of course, City Council ultimately, with everything I am saying, would make the final decision. I'm trying to think of what else I did. That was kind of in regards to fire. Oh, and that kind of ties in with our tree ordinance, too. There's kind of some play there. So I know the topic had come up in the last year and a half or so regarding invasive tree species, and that ties into fire to a certain degree. And so I think that needs to be revisited, and I'd be happy to look at that. And I believe there may have been some direction to Greg Grant, the Public Works Director, to have the tree committee revisit that again. So personally, I think that needs to happen. Another program that we could do, and this is in regards to water. For example, the city of Ventura has this, as do other communities. It's a curb cut program. And it would go through Public Works, and someone would come in to pull a permit. I think it should be a no-fee permit, but that could be worked out. Or maybe there's an incentive. But it's basically for someone, if their property had the right conditions, in other words, like a curb and gutter and a parkway, you could cut in. It allows you into the gutter, you re-landscape, and allows you to capture stormwater. Well, you're not going to capture a lot of stormwater. I've had people say, well, you're not going to fill the aquifer. But one of the other important reasons for doing is you're capturing the first flush. So you're capturing any pollutants that are in the street before a first rain, and the soil microbes will filter it out. And in addition, the water that's being captured can help reduce irrigation water. And if there's a lot, sure, it could go down and potentially help, with the aquifer. So that's another program, for example. So those are some landscape ones that I've looked at. I also know that the state is, they've just had another meeting regarding the modified water efficient landscape ordinance as to whether they should modify it, adjust it, what have you. So I should be getting some word back from them soon as far as that goes, and that might be something we want to look at. Do we want to make something more strict? We can't make it less strict, but there may be, because of our water condition here and the drought, even if it was something temporary, that we may want to look at. So that was another item. Then we also talked about building, efficiency, and this kind of a little overlap with BABS, but we've kind of talked to some of the members of BABS, and we'd like to help each other out. So in other words, if they had a suggestion for us in planning and we had one for them, I don't think we need to, it's not going to cause a problem. We have an ultimate goal of water conservation and, of course, fire protection and what have you. So, like I said, it was a long-winded answer, but that's kind of the direction that I'm going in.
Yes. Mr. Warwick.
a lot of good ideas, and I'm going to make a process comment.
Okay, good.
Because I think,
Maybe
Maybe
that's
there's
part
a
of the
more-
confusion we've had is,
Huh?
that's part of the confusion we've had is the process.
right, and I think maybe it's more efficient, rather than having, the broad sustainability committee that's just kind of broad, it could be, it's a little
Right.
squishy.
Okay,
And as you just said, it kind of didn't really have performance standards in place for getting work output done. I'm not criticizing them.
No,
I
no,
know how this goes.
I agree with you.
Okay? That maybe a better approach than
Yeah.
having just a broad sustainability committee is to have working groups defined on the topics you're talking about
Okay.
with time-certain report
I'm good
dates.
with.
We're gonna have a working group. I'd like the planning commissions, ask the planning commission for,
Right,
can I form a working group? And this is the date I'm gonna have a report back to planning commission by.
I like it.
And do it that way rather than just doing it within the broad,
Mm-hmm.
less defined sustainability. That's my comment.
Yeah.
And I guess the question for Mr. Winiger, but would that have to be an official sanctioned thing, or do we just call it another subcommittee? I think we're part of the,
I have some observations going along with what Bill was saying about process, and I'd
Yeah.
like to take one step
Jump
back. And that is, what is the charter of this subcommittee, and what was the authorization as to, John, when you brought it up, you said, you're trying to decide, you're being spread thin, and I don't know if I understood you correctly, but it sounded like you were asking for some approval or sentiment from the city council as to this subcommittee. Did the city council set the subcommittee up? Or was this just a subcommittee of a commission, in which case I think all our commissions should have a perfect, a free hand, as long as it doesn't get into staffing and resources to explore whatever they want. They come up with a good idea, and they report it back in and see whether or not they get some support for it at budget time. So I'm not sure where this all fits. If it wasn't authorized by the council, and it doesn't, maybe because it didn't have a charter, it was just a very broad sense. Some of the things that you bring up, particularly water and fire, are extremely important and are being worked on by a variety of
Right.
of groups in the city. And so I think, as I have said on the water issue, we do not lack committees. What we lack is just water, and the same thing would be true of a lot of things in the town. We don't lack committees. So if we could define what that is, or simply give permission for people to be creative and to, if they come up with good ideas, the ideas sell themselves, or should.
Yeah, I just think it works better to have a topic definition and a time certain,
Yeah.
rather than an open-ended deal. That's
I love the idea of calling it a working group and
Yeah, I
not
like-
necessarily a subcommittee.
Right, I
'cause
like the idea of
subcommittee
working
implies a
group
lot.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like the idea of working group because it's a little bit more focused on getting the work done. And it's
Yeah.
more, I think it's more inviting of people from the community.
exactly,
well.
yeah. And I think as long as we have less than a quorum of commissioners, any group of people could meet, as long as they,
So if I'm understanding you correctly, when we were doing this originally, it was just commissioners and it wasn't open to the public. So with the working group, am I
You could
getting?
lead a working group.
Okay, so anyone could come.
Absolutely.
And we could do it. And I just wanted to say, I know there are other groups in the community working on things. I've been to some of the meetings and I'm well aware of it. I was pretty much specifically looking at targeting things that are like in the code or possibly could be added to the code or modified. And
You have a
what-
lot
what
of
have-
ideas, I know.
I know,
You have many ideas.
I do.
Yeah. Just get them out, get them out.
Yeah, oh no, I do.
I'm going to
So-
ask you two guys to sit apart in future. Between the two of you, we could be all
I
night
didn't do that.
with the brainstorming sessions. Yeah.
All right,
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Commissioner
So
Francino.
what's the original basis for this, the roadmap to sustainability? Was that how, and then my other question is, why would we even have a sustainability subcommittee when everything we do, the basis of it should be sustainability? I agree. You know, so maybe it's time to maybe reword what it is, and then be careful. And you're the right person to do exactly what you've described. I feel, you have the landscape background and all of that, but I just don't want to see you duplicate, like you said, you're already aware of other, like the Green Coalition, this is all about what they want to do. I was at a meeting Saturday with about 20, the leaders of 20 different groups, And so that we want to have a coordinated effort to make Ojai a model sustainable community. So it sounds great.
That sounds wonderful. Mr. Haney?
What I heard is you wanted our blessing, so be it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Quilisi?
And, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Steve.
Go ahead, Kathy, you're not done.
I was just going to say that, so at our next planning commission, I will come back with just a brief report, and I will have a date of when I will come back with the completed, information at that point. Not that it's going to be fully fleshed out, but like a progress check-in, here's where I'm going, and ultimately an end date on it,
I like that.
which I like too. So I'm good with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Quilisi?
Thank you. I was intrigued that Commissioner Nolan said her interests were fire and water, because those are mine too, but from a different point of view, perhaps. We've all heard the apocryphal stories of the auto accident on Country Club Drive where a fire hydrant was knocked off of its base and there was no jet of water into the air. There was a little bit of bubbling of water. I have seen what purports to be a public records request of about 3.5 years ago for where do we stand in terms of fire prevention in the city. How many fire hydrants do we have? The Fire Protection District, I think it's called, has an ordinance that says every fire hydrant needs to be tested every 3 years, both static and dynamic pressure and water flow. And so I'm getting ready to make my own public records request again of the Fire Protection District and say, how many fire hydrants do we have? When was each of them last tested? And what's the result of those tests? And I approach it from this point of view because if we have areas in the city, for example, that do not have adequate pressure and water flow for fire prevention, then I think we're starting to get into the question of land use. Is it appropriate, is it proper for someone to develop a piece of property that cannot be protected from fire? And more importantly, whose neighbors, as a result, cannot be protected from fire? So there's a lot of data to be gathered, I think, and a lot of questions to be answered about are we, in fact, we being collectively, the city, the fire department, the water purveyor, whoever is involved in all of this, and I think it's probably all three at some point, who is taking responsibility for seeing that all areas of our city have adequate potential for fire protection? And if there are areas that don't, then I can see myself as a planning commissioner saying to someone who comes in with a design review permit request, for example, saying, we love your design, we think that'd be a real addition to the city, but at this moment, that is not a safe place to put a building of any sort because there's no water there. And so let's all get together and talk to Casitas and talk to the fire department and get things installed and get things tested. And then when it's safe, we'd love to have you develop that parcel. That seems to me a legitimate concern of the Planning Commission and a legitimate type of decision that the Planning Commission might make. And I'm interested in the council's reaction to those thoughts. That's my water side of it. I'll get back to the fire side later.
Mr. Mayor, back in 2014, we did exactly what Mr. Quilisi's requesting. I don't know whether a report has been subsequently produced or not, but it was provided to the city by Golden State Water, and Golden State Water and the fire district went out and did a survey of our hydrants within the town. They have within this report, they have every hydrant. There's 256 hydrants or something like that, as I recall. But they didn't test necessarily every hydrant, but what they did is they tested lines from one end to another, tested the pressure and everything. They might not have tested everything in between because they're all on the same line. But that report is available. In fact, I have a copy of it. I sent it to Mr. McClary just this week because I was interested to know if that had been updated, because as Mr. Quillisi says, every hydrant is supposed to be tested within a certain period of time by the fire district. And Casitas, now as they've taken over the water company, I don't know whether they've taken on the responsibility or whether outside of their district before they took over the city had the same responsibility for fire hydrants in the county or in their service area. I just don't know, but it seems like they would, because the fire district's the one that's responsible for it. So I agree, we need to bring it up, and if we have any kind of an update by Casitas as to their taking over Golden State Water, we should ask Mr. Wickstrom that exact question, as to what is the status of our hydrants, and do they have a plan in place to have them all tested as they're supposed to?
Because there are valves in every hydrant, and there are also valves to shut off a hydrant if it gets broken, like run over by a car. And again, apocryphal stories that have come out, there's a hydrant that's broken and it's gushing water, and they go to turn off the valve and the valve won't turn. So they can't shut off the hydrant. It's a matter of insufficient testing and verification of the safety of the system. And I think we should all be concerned about it.
Can we find out how many didn't work during this last fire? Because I did hear reports.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I have the name of the person who was telling me that. I'll find out where she lives.
The number I heard was there are 500 hydrants in the city,
Yeah.
but I don't know what the real number is because I don't have the data.
Okay, getting the inventory shouldn't be that difficult between the combination.
Testing records.
You know, starting with just the inventory, what do we have and where is it? And that, the sources for that are the water company and the fire service, whatever maps they have. But you got three elements. You have the infrastructure, does it exist? Then you have the maintenance, does it work? And then you got the supply, is there anything running through the lines? And there are a lot of reasons why that sometimes doesn't happen, like when the pumps go down in a fire, or everybody's using the water and the water pressure's gone, or you just don't have enough pressure, or you don't have a large enough line. What this is all going to get down to is when the Casitas Water District sort of partnered or stepped up to take out the Golden State, everybody was doing high fives. Now there's a whole lot of work to be done by Casitas, but they don't do it for free. It's all of us that have it in the rates. And so there's going to be, issues like water bonds or something in order to build the fire system.
There's $9 or $10 million worth of capital improvement program in the bonds.
Correct, but that is for all capital improvement or repair, and apparently if you've seen some of the lines they've taken out of the ground, there's stuff that hasn't been touched in, 75 years, and one of the problems with an older system, with the static pressure, when you start doing the different tests, you get what they call, I don't know if it's called a hammerhead anymore, but it's the idea. And one of the apocryphal stories was the Super Bowl, where at the halftime everybody got up and flushed at the same time. And suddenly the system started blowing up, because when the pressure comes back in, it happened down at Poly Pavilion not too many years ago when it flooded and then we had the issue that you described where the valve didn't work to shut off the main line that took out the theater. That stuff we can identify. The question is who's going to pay for it? And right now it's going to fall into the lap of the water company, and the water company is now Casitas. So we need to be talking with everybody about how are we going to go about this, because it's not going to be for free. The fire district does not test the fire hydrants anymore like they used to. And the reason for that, as it was explained to me, is that the fire department can go out and turn the valve on and turn the valve off as long as the valve works. But they are not in a position to repair the valve, as is the water company. So that's been pushed back on water companies all over the, in order to,
You shouldn't keep them from testing. the
absolutely not. So someone has to start asking the public policy questions and then decide where we go from there. Bill, you?
Randy was first.
Randy?
Well, it's something that should have been done on the front end when Casitas took over for Golden State, and that would have been a properly written franchise agreement. And through a franchise agreement, all of these issues could have been identified and could have been certified as to who is accountable for performing and providing and following up. And we didn't have that.
But that should have actually been done, Randy, back when Golden State was in business here. And had we done that, I wasn't here at the time when they set up, but that we would still have Golden State if we had tried to write a franchise agreement with.
Well, again, that, and I agree with you on that, because that also takes us back to the original contract that was written
Back in
to
the
allow
60s.
Golden State. Again, it was poorly written, and it wasn't written with the community being in the forefront. It was kind of a joint contract, but again, they just didn't identify what the needs of the community are, much less we're going to be. We've got an 85-year-old plus water system that hasn't been touched. I mean, who knows how much asbestos we have down there? Who knows how much clay, how much? I mean, we just have a lot of unknowns. And the fact that we never really, from the get-go, and if there's any hindsight thinking on the difference between Golden State and Casitas, again, it's the fact that we don't have a written contract spelling out who does what. It's just going to be, like Mayor Johnson just said, we'll have to ask somebody, and then we're going to have to recognize it may cost us more money. So it should have been written into the contract. You will provide these services. You will check our fire hydrants every 3 years. You will check our shut-off valves, our gate valves, or whatever we choose to call them, on a yearly basis. There's just nothing in writing for anyone to follow up on.
Well, but there are health and safety laws as a basis for what we need to be doing and talking with them. I don't think it's our water system. It hasn't been since we gave it up how many years ago, and it overlaps our boundaries. It's more than the city, and the people who bought the water system at our urging, or a lot of the citizens' urging, was Casitas, and I don't believe a municipal water district needs a franchise. We just need to have an agreement, as Randy says, that specifies who's going to do what, so we can hold somebody accountable. Bill?
I just want to jump in here. I don't think it's as difficult as we're making it. The American Waterworks Association has very clear standards, best management practices defined and used by agencies all over the country for things like how you do testing of valves, how you test hydrants. The city of Ventura has promulgated a lot of this with the kind of trucks for testing that don't waste water, for example, and also reduce the hammer work. And again, so to speak to the question of standards, a franchise agreement is about standards for the health and safety of our people, our citizens. That can be done other ways other than a franchise agreement, but it's certainly one tool that can be used to achieve something like you will follow AWWA standards. Very simple. Published standards that are followed by agencies all over this country. What we found out, referring to Paul's investigation, that was went on during the flow period, when that was gearing up, was that between the fire district and Golden State, they were blaming each other for not testing hydrants for decades. We had decades of never testing a hydrant. And the fire department was saying it was Golden State's fault, and Golden State was saying, well, it's the fire district's fault. So what we have here, I think, is something that we could close the loop pretty easily on some published standards that are available and in use all over this country for things like this.
Right, but the standards really aren't the problem. The placing of responsibility and accountability is what needs to be worked on.
And that's one thing we could
Mr.
do
Mayor?
with things like a franchise agreement.
Right. Paul?
I provided this report. This was provided to us in 2014, and it was a report done by Golden State, in which every one of the fire hydrants, when it was tested, what was tested within the city of Ojai, as well as their service area, is on here, and the address where that fire hydrant is. And at that time, Golden State is saying that they operate and maintain 365 fire hydrants in the Ojai system. 314 are located within the city limits. As part of their overall maintenance scheme, they have provided us with a fire hydrant maintenance program in which they specify exactly what they have to do, how they go about doing it, that it has to be, everyone has to be tested within 3 years.
That was after the inquiries were
That's
made.
right,
We
after
found out
the
they hadn't
inquiry
been
was
testing
made.
for decades.
Right. However, when they gave us the report back, and as I said, this report lists all
What did they really do?
365 fire hydrants. They have on here the hydrant number, where it's located. For instance, this is Ojai and Signal. It says hydrant flushed, yes or no. Hydrant operational, yes or no. City hydrant, yes or no. Valve, and it says turns in depth. I'm not sure what that is. The date that they had tested it, this one happened to be December 5, 2012, and had the hydrant been replaced? And the answer is no. Now, as you come down this list, in 117 of 213, here's where they replaced a hydrant at Willow Street and Fox Street southwest corner. They had to replace a hydrant. They go through each one of these locations, stating whether it was a city hydrant or outside the city, whether it was operational, whether it had been flushed, and the date that they did all of that. And on here, there are many hydrants that were replaced. I would say, just in looking at it, 75 or 80.
But again, it was a city initiative that led
Right.
to this.
And then, this is what they gave back to us. So
Right.
this is the process and the report that I would have thought through due diligence Casitas would have wanted to know about. And that Casitas now, because some of these hydrants hadn't been checked since 2012, many of them were done in 2014, they're coming up now to be tested, but the ones in 2012 should have been tested
overdue, yeah.
2 years ago. So at any rate, this report is available, and I don't know whether the council wants Mr. McClary to go ahead and distribute it to you. It was given to the city council and to the city manager back in July of 2014. But I think this is the kind of report we ought to ask Casitas for an update of.
Right.
Can that be
I
available
would
on
agree.
the city website? Is it something we could post there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a public record, so we can get that put up, and we'll email it out as well to the council members and planning commissioners.
That'd be fantastic to know.
But it would seem that this is not an action for this meeting, but at a future meeting, that we should give, or the city manager should prepare a report as to how do we resolve the accountability, responsibility issue, and what are the mechanisms for doing it. As I think Bill pointed out, it doesn't have to be a franchise, but it does. We do need to have
Something.
something that. Plus, but otherwise, it's what the trial. The trial attorneys will solve it for us with a class action. If you've seen the newspaper about the Upper Ojai where they didn't have water pressure, in a way, Casitas was cooperating with those who wish to have the system bought out, and then they, you should excuse the old expression, but they bought a pig in a poke, and now we're all getting poked. Little pun there. Okay.
Well, it just seems to me that the process is in place, and it's supposed to be done every 3 years. Should be done every 3 years. They got the procedures to do it every 3 years, so Casitas should be
And
doing it.
it's at least our neighbors
in
now we're
conjunction-
working with, you know?
In conjunction with the fire district. I mean, it's all right there.
Right, but
The availability of water for fire protection, which might be discernible from this data and might not, it seems to me plays into Commissioner Nolan's fire map.
Right. And one other thing I just wanted to tag on, since we're talking about committees, Commissioner Quillisi and I are both on the Complete Streets Committee, and we had our first meeting of the year last week, and we were looking at our goals for the year, and of course, we finished, with the master plan last year. Thank you, City Council, much appreciated. But what we looked at was, projects for this year that we wanted to do as a committee, and one of the important things that we came up with was basically creating supplements to that master plan. And the supplements that we're looking at are the sidewalk infill. But in the process of doing that, what we talked about was actually, and we're going to do it at our next meeting, we're going to actually go out and hit the streets again like we did several years ago. And we're going to coordinate our efforts with the capital improvement plan for the next cycle. So we want to make sure that whatever we're advising is tied in, makes financial sense and timely also. So we're going to target the map that Greg Grant has produced in the Public Works Department, and he has it delineated the next cycle of street improvements. So we're going to actually go down those streets and identify where sidewalks are missing or other things. But in addition, we're going to look at the utilities. We have to see where this is going to go, and I'm just sharing this right now. But potentially, we may be recommending or advising that the city contact some of the utility companies, and this ties into what Commissioner Quillisi was saying, that if the proper utilities aren't there, for instance, fire capability with a fire hydrant, how does that affect permitted projects coming through Planning Commission? Or even maybe water use, depending on what the project is. So I just wanted to mention that. I know that's a little maybe cross-homogenation there, but
Well, and
Yeah.
before we all pile on and call Casitas the root of all evil, I have to say, from a personal point of view, they came in and put a new water main in our street. They took out a 1929 4-inch main and put in a brand-new 6-inch main. And instead of having one 4-inch fire hydrant at one end of our block, we now have 6-inch fire hydrants at both ends of our block. And all of a sudden, I feel a little safer.
Especially on that big new investment you made.
And they did all of that before Greg Grant came in and paved the street,
Yeah.
which is just the right order of
right, and that's where
execution.
So I just want to add one,
Yeah, I would second that they have made a real effort to try and cooperate with the city.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Mayor, I just want to add something to that, though. Although you appreciate that new 6-inch and those two 4-inch
6-inch.
hydrants, what about someone else in some other part of the city that
Absolutely,
doesn't have squat?
right.
So there is
Right.
no prioritization based on any communication or joint communication within us and them to help make determinations as to what should be replaced and what are the priorities. That's one of the things, again, if you go back to some type of a franchise agreement, or even, it doesn't even need to be that. I'll stipulate that we create an agreement that they just,
Agree on a set of standards for performance.
Right.
Yeah.
and I think that's what's lacking. So I'm not piling on them. I think it's something that we need to figure out how to do. And we need to do that sooner than later regarding water.
Keeps going back to placing responsibility and accountability, and the city is not the one that has to do that, but I guess in reality, we do have to, we have to push to get them to do what they're doing, but they just took over, and apparently nobody pushed Golden State that hard. It was mostly they were upset with the rates, not with the service. And now we have an opportunity to solve the problem, but I think we'd have to look at Casitas as a partner rather than as part of the problem. Bill?
Actually, the city did help develop the kind of evidence that led to their culpability for things like hydrants. The city played a real role in that.
Right, but if we do that to our newest partner, then who's going to provide the water?
I'm not saying we should.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, we've identified the problem pretty well.
We
It's the
yeah.
solution that is,
Maybe the thought process should again, Johnny, and I agree with you on a lot of these things, is how we approach it. Because I have a tendency, to be honest with you, I have a tendency to think that these agencies have these protocols already in their methods and standards and in their procedures. We're not a new city to them. We're a new city to them. We're not a new city procedurally. They've been delivering and managing water all over this county for many, many, many years.
And
But
yeah,
what I'm, so
and
what
the
I was-
California has standards that we are supposed to comply with, and I'm
So
sure
what
they
I'm trying to
would.
say is, like for me, it's interesting, the first letter they sent out, the very first letter that Casita sent out in their introductory to this community was a letter stating, please sign this, and if you, just because we want you to know, if you don't pay your water bill, we have the right to shut it off. That was the first letter they sent out. It wasn't a letter that said, hi, we're Casitas Municipal Water District, we're your new water purveyor, and say howdy. Instead, it's, if sign this paper so that we have the right, that we've notified you that we have a right to shut your water off. Then the second thing they did is they came in and they changed all the meters out in the community. Again, was that the priority of the community? Was that the need of the community? Or were there more infrastructure repairs that might have been a higher priority? Again, we never had that discussion, but I imagine these meters, these new meters will actually account for every millimeter of water that's coming out of their system and into our houses and businesses. So I understand their need to do that.
Well, it's the need for all of us to do that.
And then the third thing, again, this is where I struggle with this, is the third thing they did is, here we have water being shut off in the middle of Christmas, due to a lack of either misunderstanding, misinformation, or whatever. But that's why, for me, I have a hard time trying to be nice to them, but I will work on being really nice to them this year again, John.
Well, you need more work on that, Randy. If this is the being nice, I hate to see when you get mad at them.
And again, we are not the water purveyors, but what we are the voice of this community.
Guardians of the citizens.
That's right.
Right, but it didn't seem to me whoever the previous guardians were of the city before Casitas got involved trying to help us, that we did much of a job getting Golden State in line. And this goes way back. It goes all the way back to the city giving away the water system, but
67.
we can't go back and do that. We've got a good partner, and I
I'll
think.
also add, Mr. Mayor, that at the time we did the flow checks, on the fire hydrants, there was a fraction of our community that was complaining that we were wasting too much water doing it, because it does use a lot of water, and that's why
Not if you get the right tool,
Yeah.
like Ventura had. You
Get
can
a
get a
truck.
tool that means no wasted water when you check the hydrant. It's a DES
Evidently,
truck.
we were wasting water in the middle of a drought.
Yeah.
And worse, when you turn the valve on and can't turn it off, you
That's
waste a
right.
lot of water.
That's right.
But,
But-
okay.
So I'd like to just finish, I know I've spoken a lot on this water thing, but I'll finish with one last idea on water. I was reviewing some information online about Australia, and one of the things that they stated about their water policies and issues there was, if you want community buy-in, you need to notify your community as to what level of water you are at. And I propose that we find a place in this village to put up a sign, pretty much like we do when we're looking for money.
Yeah.
Big
That's
thermometer.
good.
And we put a thermometer with our water level, because this community really needs to know where we are at the lake level, and they really need to know where we are at the aquifer. And it's just important that the more of us that see that, the more of us will take personal action to actually buy in and solve this problem we're in. And I think that we need to do that as soon as possible, because if we wait until April and we head into a stage 4, with, and then we start discussing what that's gonna look like, I think we're in January. We need to figure out how to have this done by February, and we need to have those levels posted, and we need to start having a huge talk about water before April.
And how many communities do you know that post one of those?
Alls I said is what I read online, and
Yeah,
if you get a
good.
buy-in from your community,
Yeah.
you're gonna get better results.
Well, I got a feeling that the business community would be concerned about.
Or
you
the
know,
real estate community.
Yeah, right, and the real, it's all part of it, but, we do need to pay attention to that, but we also should, if we're gonna put up a sign on what a really good job conservation has done within this valley. It's remarkable. Trouble is, conservation isn't gonna solve it,
That's right.
so.
Still gotta do it.
Okay, fire, is that what you wanted to talk about?
Fire away.
Fire and flood.
This, and this, as Commissioner Nolan said, could involve both the Planning Commission and the BAB, because I think there are building standards aspects to it, like it's still legal to build a house in this town with wood shingle roof, which to me is absolutely insane. I don't know why that rule is still on the books and why it hasn't been changed. But there are also things that might be called land use kind of provisions, which involve clearing brush away from an area that's to be developed. And I'm not clear on which pieces are things that the planning commission should be worrying about and say laying conditions on design review permits or other kinds of permits that come before the planning commission. And I'm looking for some help to understand the fire-related issues. It's not just the building standards. Clearly, that's a bad kind of issue. But there are land use standards, and I don't know I think of them land use standards, and I don't know exactly how to convey the things, because I'm ignorant, the things that the planning commission should be concerned about related to fire as it looks at the cases that come before us. And so I'm looking for help here.
Okay, well, I would think that wouldn't be I mean, it would be certainly a question to raise, but I don't think that's the responsibility of the planning commission.
No.
Commissioner Nolan.
Planning
has a-
commission looks to the code and.
And the
And
fire
the
I
district
think that
should
might be
zoning-
part of the landscape standards, so we
Right.
just,
Yeah, I was just going to mention,
It's part of it, certainly.
But if adopted by council,
right, if adopted by council.
but if not, then
Yeah, and, it's interesting too, because I think about, well, how many projects actually come through the planning commission, and depending on where they're located within the city limits, would, what you're speaking about, which in most communities is called like a fuel modification plan, and they might have another name for it, but it has to do with defensible space,
Right.
turning in the plans, doing a fire-wise landscape, following all the design principles for firescaping, and it even includes kind of like a maintenance schedule on how you're going to deal with existing chaparral and what's have you. And that all, in my opinion, ties into that fire map, and how that would work. I don't know if did that answer your question? But basically, that is a
little
tool
bit,
for,
a little bit, but
for
there
making that
should
happen.
also be fuel modification standards for undeveloped land. And there's a fair amount of it along Ojai Avenue, particularly
Right.
toward the east end.
That could be a maintenance and potential enforcement program. I mean, that's how I'm seeing it. But Steve, maybe you and I can work on this together, if you're interested.
Bill?
just to repeat, I think what's already been said, is the bottom
Yeah.
line is, make recommendations if you think there needs to be
Exactly.
changes in the code or adopted resolution, by guidelines adopted by
Right.
resolution by council.
Okay?
Short of that, you're not a legislative body,
Exactly, and I agree.
Sure.
bottom line.
Just
All we
advising.
have the
And
power
so
to do is recommend
You
to
can make
the council.
recommendations for
Exactly.
legislative changes, but you cannot
Right.
implement what you would hope would be in the legislation
Right.
in your review. And that's my opinion.
Right. No, that's true, yeah.
great, thank you. We can actually finish early, I think.
Yeah,
I think so.
If you have all of this, you can stand, John? Okay. Well,
Is
it's-
it time for one more point, since we're, it's 5 to 7? I'll speak with you privately, because I have a lot of concerns about the
Okay.
landscaping,
Okay.
yeah.
Steve?
Just wanted to report back about the inquiry about whether the council chambers could be available for the meeting this Thursday. I did check, we can make them available. So from Thursday, from noon to 1:30, we can make the council chambers available for that meeting. So if you could pass that along to,
Did you hear that?
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we can meet here at noon, from noon to 1:30,
okay.
Thursday,
Okay.
if you're interested in this proposal.
Okay.
That's a good group.
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll adjourn this meeting and get ready for the next one.